Good morning, it's Mike from Bloomsbury. I'm here in Bloomsbury in London, Euston, just a stone's throw away. And as you can see just behind me, I'm at the house where the great John Maynard Keynes lived. Obviously, he was a 19th century economist who died just after the war, and he has been fundamental to the study of economics. There are so many, for A-level students, so many opportunities where you can refer to his work. You don't necessarily need to know his life story, but you do need to be aware of his influence on the concepts that you will need to explore and discuss and evaluate in your studies. So one of the big things about John Maynard Keynes is he was the opposite to these sort of classicists, the people like Adam Smith and Thatcher and David Ricardo, who all believed that the market should be left to their own devices, the power of the invisible hand. The market would reset, and in the long term, everything would be fine. So you'd get unemployment, leave it alone, unemployment would drop, inflation would be high, leave it alone, inflation will drop. Whereas Keynes didn't believe that that was the case. One of the things he said was, in the long term, we're all dead. What he meant was, if we wait to the long term, the problems that we've got in the short term will become so significant that we will not be able to tackle them. So he believed that the economy wouldn't reset, and therefore what was really necessary was for some intervention, and that normally took the form of government intervention. So I've just passed the HS2 gate only 5 minutes ago, and that is a government project now that is trying to just push the economy back to where it needs to be by creating jobs and creating spending, etc. But it's the government essentially that's driving that. I mean, the private sector can, of course, drive that, but the government now is taking that control because, of course, it's now a Labour government, and that is much more about intervention. And Keynes would have probably supported that, whereas the other side, the Conservatives and all those people that believe in the free markets, would probably say, look, unless the market really needs that sort of project, leave it to be, because the private sector will provide it if it is in fact necessary. And so what you've got a lot of the time in economics is this evaluation between, should the government intervene or should the market be left to their own devices? And that's where Keynes really came in, because he's really famous for the post-Great Depression period, where America obviously was in the doldrums, and one of the ways in which they got themselves back on track, if you like, was to pour money into big projects. For example, the Hoover Dam, that again has featured frequently in classrooms around the country, even covered in the BBC Masters of Money series on John Maynard Keynes. And that provided jobs and provided employment and spending and output, which then created this huge sort of supply chain benefit, which of course most A-level students would understand to be the multiplier. So that was a good example of a government multiplier, and that was the way in which aggregate demand would increase. And again, Keynes is very much behind making sure aggregate demand is at the level it needs to be, particularly the component G. Once that G, government spending component, saw an increase, that would then feed into more investment, private sector investment, more consumption, and so on. And that would mean output would increase, national income would increase, economic growth would increase, and the economy would get back on track. So although you don't need to know about John Maynard Keynes and his life, I mean, he lived here and he was part of the very famous Bloomsbury set, because he was friends with lots of writers and poets and really creative thinkers, and they would often sit here and in the park just behind me and discuss ways in which their sort of creative ideas might influence the arts and social sciences like economics. So he was quite an influence back then, and his influence still exists today. And just dropping that in, or the tone of what I've just talked to you about, into your work would again endear you to the examiners, and therefore score the application marks for the examples, the analysis and the evaluation, all wrapped up in one, which is going to give you a great tonic and a boost going forward. I hope that helps. It's Mike from Boost Your A-Levels.